She had his favorite meal in her hands. She had forgiveness in her heart. She had no idea what was waiting behind that door. That is where this story starts, not with a marriage falling apart, but with a woman trying to hold one together. Her name was Soline Varga. She was 34 years old. She was in love with her husband. And on one ordinary Wednesday afternoon in Aldenvale, Virginia, she walked into his office building carrying a bag of truffle pasta and a quiet, terrifying hope, the kind of hope that only visits a marriage that is already bleeding. She never made it to lunch. What she found in that office did not just end her marriage. It cracked open a secret life, one that had been hidden in plain sight for over a year. A life that involved hidden money, a woman she had passed in the hallway 100 times, and a man who had looked her in the eyes every single morning and told her everything was fine. By the time the truth was fully out, nothing about Soline Varga's world looked the way it had when she pressed the elevator button that afternoon. And the story of how she got there, and what she did next, is one of the most remarkable things I have ever had to tell. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. We want to know you are watching from and what time it is in your location. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We put out new stories every single week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. Before we get into what happened in that office, you need to understand something about the city of Aldenvale, Virginia. It sits about an hour southwest of Richmond, the kind of mid-sized southern city that is proud of its community and its churches and its Friday night high school football games. 82,000 people. The kind of place where if your car breaks down on the side of the road, 3 different trucks will stop before a tow service ever does. The kind of place where everybody knows your name. Which means everybody eventually knows your business. And in the case of the Varga family, the business was bad. Here is what this story is really about. It is about a woman who gave 8 years of her life to a marriage she believed in completely. It is about a man who decided at some point along the way that one life was not enough for him, and who was good enough at deception to run 2 lives in the same zip code without getting caught. For over a year. It is about a third person who was right in the middle of all of it and who, in the end, would turn out to be the most complicated character in the entire story. And it is about what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose decides she is going to find out every single thing that was taken from her. 3 questions are going to drive everything you are about to watch. First, how does an affair like this survive in a city where people talk? Second, what exactly was Everett Varga hiding, and was the affair only part of it? And third, what does a woman do when the worst moment of her life turns out to also be the moment that saves her? Stay with me. Because not one of those answers is going to look the way you expect. This is a story about complicated people making devastating choices, and about what those choices look like from the inside of a life that looks completely normal from the outside. Soline grew up in a small town outside of Roanoke, Virginia, the third of 4 kids in a house where love was demonstrated rather than declared. Her mother worked double shifts at a textile plant for 17 years without ever complaining in front of the children. Her father coached Little League on Saturdays and never missed a single school play. They did not have much money, but they had loyalty. They had consistency. They had the unspoken understanding that when you commit to someone, you show up. Every day. No matter what. Soline carried that with her the way you carry something that was built into you before you were old enough to question it. She was the kind of student who worked twice as hard as everyone else not because she had to but because she genuinely believed that effort was the one thing no one could take from you. She put herself through college, James Madison University, on a partial academic scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. She graduated with a degree in marketing and communications and moved to Aldenvale at 23 to take an entry-level job at a regional advertising firm. Within 4 years she was a director. The people who worked for her would later describe her the same way, over and over, sharp, warm, the kind of boss who actually remembered your kid's name on their birthday. She met Everett Varga at a regional business conference in Richmond in the spring of 2016. He was presenting on a panel about logistics and supply chain management, which, objectively, is not the kind of panel that changes your life. But Solene would tell you that it was not what Everett said in the panel that got her attention. It was the way he talked to her afterward, in the hallway, over mediocre conference coffee in paper cups. She told her closest friend, Darcy Pruitt, about it that same night. She said, "He talked to me like I was the most interesting person in the room." Darcy, who knew Solene better than anyone on earth, said she had never heard her sound like that before. She said it was the first time in years that Solene sounded light. Everett Varga had built something real by the time he met Solene. He had co-founded a logistics and supply chain company called Varga and Breen with his college roommate, Otis Breen, when they were both 28 years old. By 32, Everett was VP of Operations, and the company had grown to over 200 full-time employees across 3 regional offices. He had a natural authority about him, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it without appearing to try. People described him as magnetic, charismatic, a closer. The kind of man who made you feel, when he was focused on you, that you were the only person in the world. That feeling, it would turn out, was something he offered to more than one person at a time. They dated for 8 months before Everett proposed. The proposal was not elaborate. He did not rent out a restaurant or spell out the question in flower petals. He took her to the park where they had gone on their 3rd date, and he sat down on the same bench, and he said, "I have been trying to figure out how to make this moment worthy of you, and I realize the only thing worthy of you is honesty, so here it is, I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Solene said yes before he finished the sentence. They were married in the fall of 2017 at a small ceremony in Aldenvale with 83 guests. Darcy was the maid of honor. Otis Breen was the best man. Everyone who was there would later say the same thing, they looked completely right together. And for the first 4 years, they were. They bought a craftsman house in a quiet neighborhood and rescued a dog they named Biscuit. Solene planted a kitchen garden. Everett coached a youth basketball team on Thursday nights. They had the kind of life that, from the outside, looked like the picture you put in the frame when you buy it from the store. Not perfect, they argued about money sometimes, and about how much time Everett spent at the office, and about starting a family in that careful, circular way that couples argue when they both want the same thing but are afraid to say it out loud. But real. Warm. Full. And then somewhere around year 5, quietly, without announcement, something started to shift. Everett began canceling plans. Not dramatically. Not in ways that announced themselves. Just a dinner reservation here, a weekend trip there, a Thursday night basketball coaching session that somehow stretched until 11 p.m. Solene noticed, the way you notice a slow leak, not at first, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small absences. She mentioned it to Darcy in passing once. Darcy got very quiet. Later, Darcy would admit that she had already started to hear things around Aldenvale. Things she was not sure how to say. Things she was hoping were wrong. The woman at the center of the other half of this story had arrived at Varga and Breen Logistics 18 months before any of this came apart. Her name was Remy Ashford. She was 26 years old when she took the position of administrative coordinator at the company, transferring from a firm in Richmond where she had left under circumstances that were never fully explained, a fact that would become significant later. She was 29 by the time Solene walked into that building. People who worked alongside Remy described her with striking consistency, quiet, efficient, nearly impossible to read. One former colleague put it this way, she listened more than she talked. Which sounds like a compliment, but with Remy it meant something else. It meant she was always collecting. Remy had been promoted from administrative coordinator to senior executive assistant within 18 months of joining the company, a pace that raised eyebrows in the office but that Everett had defended as straightforwardly merit-based. She handled his schedule, his correspondence, his travel arrangements, and, as it would eventually be discovered, certain financial documents that she was never supposed to see but that passed through her inbox anyway, misfiled in a general administrative queue. She saw one of those documents about 4 months before Solene walked into that building. She had asked Everett about it. He had told her it was nothing. He had changed the subject the same way, she would later say, that he always changed the subject when something was true. The affair had been going on for 14 months. And not one person in that building had said a word to Soline Varga. Not one. The Wednesday that changed everything started the way most Wednesdays do. Soline was up before 6. She made coffee. She answered emails from her home office. She went for a 30-minute run through the neighborhood, past the houses she knew, past the neighbors who waved from their driveways, through the specific ordinary beauty of a fall morning in Alden Vale. She was, by her own account, feeling something she had not felt in a while, determined. She had made a decision the night before, not a dramatic one, not a confrontational one, but a quiet private decision to try. To push past the distance she had been feeling in her marriage and remind both of them what they had built. She had been thinking about it for a week. The idea was simple. She would take him lunch, his favorite, truffle pasta from a restaurant called Halcyon Bistro on 4th Street. She would go to his office. She would sit across from him and they would eat together the way they used to before the late nights and the cancelled plans had made them two people passing through the same house. She wanted to look him in the eyes. She wanted to feel like his wife again. She called ahead to the restaurant at 11:15 to place the order. She picked it up at 12:45. She texted Everett from the parking lot. She said, "I'm coming to see you. Don't go anywhere." He texted back a single thumbs-up emoji. Soline would return to that thumbs-up emoji for months afterward. Everett was, by habit and by personality, an expressive texter. 8 years of messages between them and the language had never gone cold, not once. He texted, "I love you gorgeous," the way some people say good morning. The thumbs-up landed wrong. It sat in her stomach the whole drive over. She told herself he was in a meeting. She told herself it did not mean anything. She parked in the visitor lot at 12:58 p.m., took the food from the passenger seat, checked her reflection in the visor mirror, and walked into the lobby of Varga and Breen Logistics with a smile on her face. The lobby receptionist, a woman named Bet who had worked the front desk for 7 years, would later tell Soline's attorney that she remembered that day clearly. She remembered it because Soline had waved at her, that particular wide, warm wave she always had, and because Bet had thought to herself that Soline seemed lighter than usual. Hopeful. Like she had good news. She had waved back. She had not said anything. She would spend a long time after that wishing she had found some way to say something. Soline took the elevator to the 9th floor. She remembered the elevator doors were heavier than usual, though she would acknowledge later that they were not. That was just the way the memory had imprinted itself, everything weighted and resistant and slow. The 9th floor was quiet at that hour. Most of the staff were at lunch. The overhead lights hummed. The carpet was that particular shade of corporate charcoal gray that you stop noticing after a while, but that somehow, on that particular Wednesday, she noticed clearly. The hallway smelled like toner and coffee grounds and the faint trace of a perfume she did not recognize. She would recognize it later. She would recognize it on Remy. Everett's corner office was at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open, not fully open, just ajar, the way it usually was when he was in the middle of a meeting he was not expecting anyone to interrupt. Soline shifted the takeout bag to her left hand and pushed the door open with her right. She was smiling. She got about 3 steps inside before she stopped. The bag hit the marble floor. The container cracked. The truffle pasta spread across the tile in a slow, white cream arc. And Soline Varga stood in the middle of her husband's office and understood, in the space of 3 seconds, that her marriage was not struggling. Her marriage was already over. It had been over for a long time. She was just the last one to know. What she saw, she has described only once, to her attorney, on record, during the initial consultation. She has never described it publicly. She does not need to. The architecture of that moment is not difficult to imagine, and repeating it in detail serves no one. What matters is what happened in the 30 seconds that followed, because those 30 seconds tell you everything you need to know about Soline Varga's character. She did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not say a single word. She looked at Everett. She looked at Remy. She bent down and picked up the takeout bag off the floor, the spilled pasta, the broken container, the receipt still folded inside, and she walked back out the door. She walked down the hallway. She pressed the elevator button. She waited. Remy Ashford, in a deposition given months later, described the expression on Soline's face when she walked in. She said she had expected anger. She said she had braced for a scene, for shouting, for tears, for the kind of confrontation that you replay in your head 1,000 times when you have been living with the knowledge that this day is eventually coming. She said what she saw instead was something much worse than anger. She said Soline looked at her like she was looking at something that had already happened. Like she was not witnessing a betrayal, she was confirming one she had already, somewhere deep down, been grieving. The security footage from the lobby shows Soline walking out of the elevator at 1:19 p.m. Her posture is straight. Her steps are even. She crosses the lobby floor, passes the front desk where Bed is answering a call, pushes through the glass doors into the afternoon light, and disappears from the camera frame. The security guard stationed at the desk entrance said he saw her face as she passed. He said it was completely still. He said the only thing that struck him was her eyes, that they looked, he told an investigator later, like someone had turned a light off behind them. In the parking lot, Soline sat in her car for 11 minutes. She did not call anyone. She did not cry. She sat with both hands in her lap and stared at the steering wheel and breathed. Then she called Darcy. Darcy Pruitt answered on the first ring. She would later tell a mutual friend that she had known something was wrong before Soline said a single word. She said the silence on the line had a specific texture, not the silence of someone deciding what to say, but the silence of someone trying to figure out how to exist in a world that had just been rearranged around them without their permission. Soline told her what she had seen. Darcy did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Where are you right now?" Soline told her. Darcy said, "Do not move. I am coming to you." She was there in 17 minutes. She sat in Soline's passenger seat for 2 hours. She did not say "I told you so." She never once said that. She just sat there. Meanwhile, back on the 9th floor, Everett Varga made his first mistake. His first mistake was not the affair, that had been happening for 14 months and he had navigated it with what can only be described as operational precision. His first mistake was the thing he said when Soline walked out the door. According to Remy Ashford's own account, his first words, the very first thing out of his mouth after his wife had just walked in and walked back out, were not "Oh God." They were not "I have to call her." His first words were, "Don't say anything to anyone at work." Not remorse. Not panic. Containment. It was the language of a man whose instinct was not to feel something but to manage something. And Remy Ashford, sitting in that office, heard those words and understood something she had not fully understood before. She had been told, for 14 months, that his marriage was effectively over. That he and Soline were staying together only for appearances, for the social fabric of Aldenvale, for the sake of their friend groups, for the property they shared. That the counseling sessions Soline had been attending with him, the ones she had believed were efforts at repair, had been described to Remy as performances. Maintenance of the appearance. Nothing more. She had believed this because she had needed to believe it, and because Everett had been convincing in the way that people who are very good at lying are always convincing, not through elaborate fiction, but through the careful management of what they let you see. But sitting in that office, watching the man she had been involved with for over a year manage the moment his wife had just walked in on them, Remy Ashford heard his first instinct and she recognized it. Because it was the same instinct he had always had. Everett called Soline 16 times in the 3 hours after she left that building. She did not answer once. He showed up at their house at 7:12 p.m. in the suit he had been wearing when she walked into his office. He rang the doorbell 4 times. Solene watched through the side window without answering. He stood on the porch for 6 minutes. Then he left. He called 16 times over the course of the evening. She let them all go to voicemail. He left 3 messages. The first one was apologetic, halting, earnest-sounding, the kind of voicemail that is designed to create enough room for a conversation to start. The second was explanatory, a longer message that introduced the word context, which is a word that people deploy when they want to reframe something that does not benefit from reframing. The third message had a different quality entirely. The third message had an edge in it. Not anger, exactly. More like irritation. Like a man who was accustomed to being able to manage situations and was frustrated that this one was not responding to management. Solene's attorney, Vera Lindstrom, listened to that third voicemail the following morning. She listened to it twice. She said, "Save that one." Here is the part of the story that people always get wrong about Solene Varga. The popular assumption, when a woman discovers what she discovered, is that grief comes first. That the days immediately after are defined by crying and eating cereal at 2 in the morning and calling your mother and staring at the ceiling. And for Solene, yes. There was grief. There were nights that were exactly that dark and that long. She would not pretend otherwise. But what people miss is that the grief and the determination ran in her at exactly the same time, in parallel, like 2 rivers that look separate but share the same underground source. She was devastated. She was also already working. The night of that Wednesday, after Darcy had finally gone home at nearly 10 p.m., Solene sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and 2 pens and a glass of wine she never touched, and she started writing down everything she could remember from the past year that had not made sense. She wrote for 3 hours. By the time she stopped, she had 4 pages. 4 pages of small, careful observations, the kind that get dismissed individually but that, stacked on top of each other, become something that cannot be explained away. Individually, each item on that list could have had a perfectly ordinary explanation. Together, they told a story that she realized she had been refusing to read for over a year. The Halcyon Bistro receipt. She had found it in Everett's jacket pocket 8 months earlier, a dinner for 2 on a Thursday night when he had told her he was working late with a client. When she had asked him about it, he had said it was a team dinner and he had forgotten to mention it. She had believed him. Or, more accurately, she had chosen to believe him, which is a different thing entirely. The receipt had come from the same restaurant where she had just picked up his favorite lunch. The restaurant he had introduced her to. The one he had taken her to for their 3rd anniversary. He had taken Remy there too. Multiple times, it would emerge. It had apparently been their place. The work trip to Richmond the previous spring, the one that was supposed to be 3 days but stretched to 6. He had told her a deal had gotten complicated at the last minute and they needed him on the ground. She had managed without complaint. She had covered for him at a dinner party they were both supposed to attend by telling their friends he had been called away for work, and she had meant it as a kindness toward him. He had not been in Richmond on days 4, 5, and 6. He had, as the phone records would confirm, been at a hotel 40 minutes outside of Alden Vale. The phone number she had noticed on a joint bill, not his work phone, his personal phone, that appeared 47 times in a single month. She had asked about it once. He had said it was a new vendor contact. She had not pushed. Women in marriages that are quietly failing often describe this particular phenomenon, the moment you choose not to push. Not because you are weak, but because you are afraid of what the pushing will uncover, and because a part of you is still hoping you are wrong. Solene had chosen not to push. The number was Remy's. By morning she had called an attorney. Her name was Vera Lindstrom, a divorce attorney in Alden Vale who had been practicing family law for 22 years and who was, by all accounts, extraordinarily good at it. Solene sat across from her at 9 a.m. with her yellow legal pad and walked her through every item on the list. Vera listened without interrupting. When Solene finished, Vera said 2 things. The first was, this is going to be okay. The second was, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any reason to believe there are financial assets you do not know about? Solene thought about it. Then she said she did not know. Vera said, that is the answer I was afraid of. Before we go further, we really want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments and let us know where you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do that now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one come out every week, and we want you here for all of them. The financial investigation started within the first week. Vera brought in a forensic accountant, a woman named Hadley Foss who specialized in marital asset cases and who had, in Vera's words, found money in places where lawyers did not know money could hide. Hadley requested 6 years of financial records. Bank statements, investment accounts, business filings, tax returns, credit card statements. The picture that began to emerge over the following 2 weeks was not the picture Solene had expected to see. She had expected to find an affair. What she found, underneath it, was an architecture. The first thing Hadley identified was a pattern of expense reports at Varga and Breen that did not align with any client account on file. Hotel stays processed as client entertainment. Restaurant charges submitted as team dinners with no corresponding team roster. A 3-day conference registration in a city where no relevant conference had taken place that week. Individually, each item was small enough to pass without comment. Together, they represented a company that had been, at least in part, funding a private life. The second thing Hadley found took longer. It was a holding company, registered in Delaware, as many such entities are, because Delaware's corporate laws are designed for opacity. The company had a name that bore no obvious connection to Everett or to Varga and Breen. It had a P.O. box address. It had been opened not before the marriage, as Everett would later claim, but 22 months prior, which is to say, while they were fully married, while Solene was managing half the household and working full-time and building a life she believed was shared. And it held, at the time of discovery, approximately $340,000. Hadley Foss would describe this, in the clinical language of her profession, as premeditated asset protection. Vera Lindstrom would describe it, in the language of a family court attorney, as the concealment of marital property. Solene Varga would describe it differently. She would say, he was not just cheating on me. He was building an exit. He was building a version of the future that he was not planning to share with me, and the entire time he was building it he was sleeping next to me and looking me in the face. Otis Breen reached out to Solene through a mutual friend during the second week. He asked if they could talk. Solene, on Vera's advice, agreed to a brief conversation, in a public place, with a record of the meeting. They met at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. Otis arrived looking, by Solene's account, like a man who had not been sleeping well. He told her he was sorry. He said he had known for about 6 months that something was happening between Everett and Remy. Solene asked him why he had never said anything. He said, it wasn't my marriage. A long pause. Then he said, I know how that sounds. Solene said nothing. She let the silence sit. Then Otis said something else, something he had come to tell her specifically, something he had clearly been weighing for days. He said that there were expense reports. That he had seen them. That he had not flagged them at the time because Everett had told him they were client-related and he had been willing to accept that explanation because questioning it would have meant opening a door he did not want to open. He told her this because he believed she deserved to know, and possibly because he understood, by that point, that the financial audit was coming regardless and that his silence was going to look like complicity if it came out the other way. The day after her meeting with Otis, Solene received a phone call from a number she did not recognize. She answered it on the third ring. The voice on the other end was Remy Ashford. There was a pause after she said her name, a pause in which Solene could have hung up and no reasonable person would have blamed her. She did not hang up. She would tell you herself she does not entirely know why. Maybe because she had been asking questions for 2 weeks and Remy was the one person who had been inside the story from the beginning. Maybe because she had spent 14 months being handled carefully by a man who was very good at it, and she was tired of carefully managed information. Maybe she just wanted to hear what the other woman sounded like when she thought she had something to say. Remy spoke for 11 minutes. She did not apologize, at least not in the direct way that word usually lands. She also did not deflect. What she did was explain, and the explanation, once Solene heard it, rearranged certain things. Remy told her that Everett had told her, from nearly the beginning of the affair, that his marriage had been over for close to a year. That he and Solene were staying together only for appearances, for the social fabric of Aldenvale, for the sake of their friend groups, for the property they shared. That the counseling sessions Solene had been attending with him, the ones she had believed were efforts at repair, had been described to Remy as performances. Solene went very still during this part of the call. Then she said, "We have been in real couples counseling. I believed in it. I believed it was working." There was a silence on Remy's end of the line. Then Remy said, "He told me it was just for appearances." Another silence. Then Remy said something else, something she had clearly come to the phone with the intention of saying, the thing the whole phone call had been building toward. She said, "Check the offshore account." And then she gave her the name of the holding company. And then she hung up. Solene sat with her phone in her hand for a long time after that call ended. Then she called Vera Lindstrom. And the case changed. The name of the holding company that Remy gave Solene matched exactly what Hadley Foss's financial investigation had already uncovered, which meant Remy had known about it independently, which meant the document she had described seeing in a misfiled inbox queue was real. It also meant something else. Remy had been sitting on that information for months. She had known about a hidden account that contained over $300,000 in marital assets and had said nothing, until the moment she understood that she was not, and never had been, the woman Everett Varga intended to build a future with. The sequence matters. She did not call Solene out of conscience. She called Solene after she understood that she had been lied to too. This is the part of the story where people tend to have very strong and very divided opinions. Some people hear what Remy did and call it justice. Some people hear it and say she was a woman scorned acting out of spite. Some people, the most interesting ones, in my view, hear it and ask a more uncomfortable question: does the reason matter, if the result is that the truth comes out? I am not going to answer that for you. But I will tell you that it is the question Solene herself wrestled with for a long time. She wanted to feel a clean and righteous fury toward Remy Ashford. And she did feel it, sometimes. But she also recognized that the phone call Remy made, whatever drove it, was the single most important thing that happened in that entire sequence of events. Without it, the offshore account might have stayed buried. The divorce would have been painful regardless. But it would have been a different financial outcome. And Solene knew it. Everett's deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 9 months after the afternoon in the office. He arrived in a charcoal suit with his attorney, a man named Gregory Haas, who had a reputation in Aldenvale legal circles as a very competent and very expensive advocate for men going through high-asset divorces. Everett sat down across from Vera Lindstrom and Hadley Foss as if it were a business meeting. His composure, everyone present noted, was remarkable. This was a man who had been running 2 lives in the same zip code for over a year. He was accustomed to performing steadiness. The deposition proceeded methodically. Vera asked him about the marriage, about the affair, about his professional conduct. He answered carefully and without elaboration, the trained response of someone who had been well prepared by his attorney. When Vera asked about the offshore holding company, when she put the name of it on the table and watched his eyes, he said it was a legacy investment vehicle from before the marriage. He said this calmly and with apparent certainty. Then Vera placed a second document beside the first. It was the account opening date. The account had been opened 22 months ago. Not before the marriage. During it. Everett looked at the document. He looked at his attorney. He said he would need a moment. His attorney said he would like to request a brief recess. The recess was requested at 11:14 a.m. Everett and Gregory Haas did not return after the recess. Gregory Haas called Vera Lindstrom at 6:40 p.m. that same day. He was, she would later say, noticeably less composed on the phone than his client had been in person. He said he wanted to discuss settlement terms. The settlement negotiations lasted 3 weeks. They were not peaceful, exactly. The word people usually use is contentious, which in the language of divorce law means that both sides were willing to fight but ultimately judged that fighting would cost more than settling. The specific terms of what was agreed upon are confidential, as most divorce settlements are. What Solene has said publicly, the one thing she has volunteered, in a single conversation with a friend who later shared it, is this: I walked in with truffle pasta. I walked out with what was mine. The expense report issue was addressed separately, at the company level, in a process that involved the company's board and an independent auditor. The details of that process are not public record. What is public record is that Varga and Breen Logistics underwent a formal governance review in the 12 months following the divorce proceedings. Otis Breen cooperated fully with that review. He later described the experience, in an interview with a regional business publication that he probably wishes he had declined, as the most clarifying thing that has ever happened to him professionally. He said, I kept telling myself that staying out of it was the neutral choice. I understand now that silence is never actually neutral. Silence is always a choice, and it always costs someone something. Darcy was with Solene the day the settlement was signed. She said Solene cried on the way home. Not in devastation, not the way she had cried in the parking lot of Varga and Breen on that Wednesday afternoon. She cried the way people cry when something is finally, irrevocably over. The way you cry when you have been carrying something for a very long time and someone finally tells you that you can put it down. 6 weeks after the divorce settlement was finalized, Remy Ashford filed a formal workplace complaint against Varga and Breen Logistics. Not against Everett personally, he was no longer at the company by that point, having sold his interest in the business as part of the financial resolution. The complaint was filed against the company itself, and it named 3 categories of harm. The first was the misuse of her employment record and professional standing in ways connected to the affair. Her name and her position had been used, she alleged, to facilitate expense report irregularities that she had not been fully informed of and that had been processed, in part, through her administrative access. The second was the exposure of her to confidential financial documents that she should never have seen, the misfiled statement that had started this entire chain of events, which had placed her in possession of information that constituted, her attorney argued, an implicit form of liability. The third was a pattern she described as exploitation of administrative staff in positions of proximity and trust, a phrase that her attorney had constructed carefully but that pointed at something that people who have read the complaint carefully find difficult to argue with. The complaint settled out of court. Terms are not public. Remy Ashford no longer works in the logistics industry. She relocated to a different part of Virginia approximately a year after the settlement. The people who knew her before all of this would say that she emerged from it quieter than she had been, which is remarkable, given that quiet was already her defining characteristic. Whether she found what she was looking for in any of this, I genuinely do not know. I think she was a woman who made choices she believed were informed that turned out to be based on constructed information, and I think the unraveling of that construction cost her in ways that do not get much attention in stories like this one, because she is not the character the audience most naturally sympathizes with. But she was lied to too. That part is true. And the phone call she made, whatever her reasons, changed the outcome of Solene Varga's life. Those two facts live side by side. Everett Varga left Alden Vale within 2 months of the divorce being finalized. He sold his share of the company to Otis Breen at a number substantially below market value, partly because of the governance review and partly because, once the terms of the divorce were known to the business community in Alden Vale, his leverage was considerably diminished. He moved to a city that no one in this story has named publicly. He sent Solene one final text, 4 months after everything was done. It said, "I hope you're okay." She read it. She did not reply. She has said since that she did not reply not because she was still angry, she was largely past anger by that point, but because she recognized that the message was designed to elicit a response, and she had spent enough of her life responding to things Everett had designed. Otis Breen runs Varga and Breen Logistics alone now, rebranded, under new governance, with a transparency policy that the company's website describes in careful and slightly apologetic language. His Glassdoor reviews have improved. His close friends say he is not the same man he was 3 years ago. Whether that is a good thing or a bad thing probably depends on who you ask. Darcy Pruitt, who knew something was wrong before anyone said it out loud and who sat in a parking lot for 2 hours without saying "I told you so," is still Soline's closest friend. She was there for all of it. She will tell you, if you ask her directly, that the hardest part was not the discovery and not the legal process and not even the early nights when Soline's house was quiet in the particular way that a house becomes quiet when a person you shared it with is gone. She will tell you the hardest part was watching Soline figure out how to trust herself again. How to trust that what she felt was real when she had spent over a year being told, implicitly and explicitly, that what she felt was wrong. Soline Varga lives in Alden Vale. She did not leave. People expected her to leave, to take the settlement and start fresh somewhere that did not carry the specific social weight of a scandal in a city of 82,000 people where everybody knows your name. She stayed. She said she had built her life here on her own terms before Everett, and she was going to continue it on her own terms after him. She still works at the same advertising firm where she has been since she was 23. She was promoted to VP in the year after the divorce. Her kitchen garden is larger than it was. About 8 months after everything concluded, Soline started a support group. Not a public one, not a formal organization, a private gathering of women in the Alden Vale area who were navigating high-asset divorce situations. Women who were trying to understand financial documents they had never been asked to understand before. Women who were learning to read the fine print of their own lives. The group meets on Wednesday evenings. She told Darcy that the timing was intentional. It started on a Wednesday, she said. It is going to keep going on Wednesdays. The group currently has 83 members. I want to leave you with something that I have been sitting with since I first started working on this story. There is a tendency, when we tell stories like this one, to organize them around the villain. To make Everett Varga the center, to make the story about his choices, his deception, his hidden accounts and his careful management of a double life. And his choices are central. I am not letting him off. But the thing that keeps coming back to me is not Everett. It is Soline. It is the image of a woman walking out of a building with a broken takeout container and a marriage that had just ended, and the very first thing she does is pick up the bag. Clean up the mess. Hold herself together. Walk to the elevator. And then spend the next 9 months systematically finding out every true thing she had been denied and building, brick by careful brick, something that was finally, actually hers. There is a particular kind of strength that gets mistaken for composure. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that picks up the bag. I think about Soline Varga doing that, bending down in the middle of a moment of total devastation and picking up the bag, and I think about how many women have stood in their own version of that doorway and made that same quiet, uncelebrated choice. To not fall apart in the moment someone is hoping you will. To hold it together long enough to get to the elevator. To sit in the parking lot and breathe. And then to go home and get a yellow legal pad and 2 pens and start writing down everything you know. Justice in stories like this one is never clean. The financial resolution was substantial. The professional consequences were real. But there are things that do not get restored, years that do not come back, trust that does not rebuild in the same shape it held before, an understanding of someone you love that turns out to have been based on a version of them they were performing. You can be compensated for what was taken. You cannot be made whole. Soline Varga would tell you that too. And she would tell you, and this is the part one find the most worth holding on to, that she did not need to be made whole. She needed to be free. And that, in the end, she got. I want to ask you something before you go. And I mean this genuinely, I want you to think about it and then actually go leave your answer in the comments, because this is one of those stories where the conversation underneath it is going to be just as interesting as the story itself. There are 3 people in this story. There is Solene, who gave everything she had to a marriage that was being dismantled around her without her knowledge. There is Everett, who built a double life with what appears to have been a remarkable amount of calculation and remarkably little remorse. And there is Remy, who was inside the deception, who was also lied to, and who eventually made a phone call that changed the outcome, for reasons that are complicated. I want to know, which of those 3 people do you feel the most complicated about? Not the most angry at. The most complicated about. Because I think your answer to that question says something true about how you understand betrayal and accountability and what we owe each other when we are tangled up in each other's worst choices. Go tell me in the comments. I read them. I mean it. And before we close, drop your location below. Let us know where in this country you are watching from tonight. We love seeing where our community is tuning in from, and it means a great deal to us every single time. If this story hit something in you, if it made you feel seen, or furious, or grateful for something in your own life, please share it with someone you think needs to hear it. And subscribe to the Workplace Whisperer Tales if you have not already, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. New stories go up every week.